last time Myra told anyone the truth, her mother died within the hour. That was the sort of thought that arrived uninvited in storms, when white fell sideways, and the world tried to erase its own edges. She didn't talk about it anymore, the truth, or her mother. She talked instead about mileage logs and GPS pins, and it's just a hike. Armand had learned to read the shape of what she didn't say. He said he didn't mind the quiet. He minded the way the quiet seemed to watch them back. They picked the only day in February that felt like a dare. The alert went from advisory to warning at noon, but the Varon Valley trailhead was 15 minutes from Myra's cabin, and Armand insisted that the Jeep ate sleet for breakfast when they turned off the county road. The sky was the color of a split lip going purple. Pines made a black seam against it. The parking lot held exactly one snowdrift, and the whisper of tire chains that never were. It should have thrilled Myra, the empty mouth of the forest, open and waiting, but her heart thrummed like a caught animal. She counted the reasons out loud to steady herself. "Nobody here," Armand said, peering through the windshield. "It's perfect." The word perfect felt like waving a steak in front of a dog she couldn't see. She made a joke and left the engine idling 2 seconds longer than necessary, fingers hovering near the key. She was thinking of the story her mother used to tell when the furnace went out, and breath fogged in the kitchen. The one about the valley before it was named, about a winter where the snow came late and then fell all at once, sealing families into their homes, and a man who walked house to house offering warmth that smelled like cloves and iron. He was so polite, her mother would say, and so hungry for someone to invite him in. Then, later, in the hospital, when Myra asked for the truth about whether the story was hers or the valley's, her mother told it again without the smile. That was the last truth. The trailhead sign leaned like it was listening to them. A single orange marker hung at a tilt, the arrow pointing toward a chute of stone steps that fell into a narrow cleft. The steps had iced over in layers. They shone like fish scales. Myra buckled her ice cleats without looking at Armand. Her throat did the small click it did when she lied. "It's fine," she said to him, to the steps, to the small, hungry hush that lived at the bottom of that cleft. "Slow and low," Armand said. He was smiling, but his eyes kept cutting to the woods, the way prey animals checked the wind. He had that New Orleans warmth, that habit of turning fear into a joke. He'd been practicing in a land that didn't take snow seriously. Ohio made a religion of it. Myra took the lead. She moved like a prayer, on her stomach near the worst of it, testing each patch of white with the butt of her trekking pole, tapping to hear where it changed from rock to air. The sound came back wrong, deadened, as if the valley chewed it while she wasn't listening. Halfway down, Armand's foot skated. He let out a sound that was almost a laugh and caught the rail. He'd rubbed on grit tape last night like a ritual. "Easy," Myra said, feeling the old heat of anger she'd learned to save for herself. Why did she bring him here? Why did she bring anyone anywhere after what truth had cost? He read her face and said, "I wanted the empty. You wanted the winter. We can have both. That's allowed." It sounded like a promise made to a god he didn't respect. At the bottom, the cleft opened into a corridor beneath overhanging stone. The cliff face curved above them like something that had learned to inhale. Ice falls thick as belfries clung to the lip. Some had grown to the ground, blue and opaque, and full of old air bubbles like trapped eyes. Others hung inches short, the gap between ice and earth, a dark mouth, breathing. The wind dropped here. Every sound felt private and close. Myra touched the rock. It was glossy with rime, veined with seams of mineral that caught the little light and threw it back wrong. "I think this," Armand began, and then they both heard it. It wasn't a voice first. It was a throat without a mouth. A shape of syllables dragged across ice. Then it found them and became words that trembled against the cliff and slid down to their ankles like a cold hand. "Hello." It came again, a little louder, a little more certain. "Help." They both froze with a kind of shared gratitude that looked like fear. It was a relief to have something simple to do, a problem that wasn't grief or the eventual, slow arithmetic of what they were. "Where?" Myra called, hating the way her voice broke into wet leaves and hushed. "Down," the voice said, with a peculiar bright eagerness. "Please." Myra belly crawled again to the lip of the cliff that dropped into the lower valley. Snow made the edge seem innocent. She used her pole and a broken branch to prod for trust. Then she looked. At first, there was only the dizzy geometry of winter. A slope of dead leaves pressed flat beneath a crust of white. Saplings bending in prayer, and the blue-white seam of a stream that goaded the cold to work harder. Then she saw the man. He was lying on his side, the way children fall asleep in cars, one arm thrown over his head, as if blocking a sun that didn't exist. His parka was green with little blue flowers embroidered along the seams and down the zipper flap. Whimsical, as something a grandmother might have bought at a craft fair. It looked ridiculous in the way of things that survive the wrong person. His legs were wrong, not broken the way the body breaks when it hits and tries to become liquid. They were bent backward at the knees, tucked like an animal surprised mid-spring, and somehow frozen there, his other arm, hidden beneath him, bulked in a way that suggested a rude fold, as if the bone had decided to grow a hinge where there wasn't one. He turned his head to look up at her, and his eyes were startlingly pale, a gray that had gotten lost on the way to blue. The irises were so light they made his pupils look like holes burned in paper. "Don't go," he said, before she could say anything. "Don't leave me." Armand was already moving, hand on Myra's ankle in that way he had, anchoring without controlling. "I'll go back," he said, voice low and efficient. "No service down here. I'll get to the ridge. I'll call." I'll bring the kid in the car, the orange blanket. I'll bring everything. Myra started to say no, say we don't leave people, say stay. But something in the valley inhaled, and she tasted iron and clove, her mouth flooded with winter. Go, she said. Turn your phone on loud. It will explode as soon as you hit the hill. He nodded and kissed the side of her hat like he wanted luck to find his mouth. Then he ran, and the sound of his cleats on ice was swallowed as if by a church. Myra settled herself lower. The cold crept up through her belly and set itself on her ribs with clever hands. What's your name? She called, lamely, humanly. Because you know who you save better than a stranger. He paused just long enough to choose something. Hail, he said, almost shy. Hail, he tried again, as if tasting whether it fit. What's yours? Myra, her voice made steam. She watched it vanish. It's going to be okay, Hail. We're going to get you out. The word out did a strange thing in her mouth. It cut its own tongue. Down below, Hail made a relieved sound that was only technically a laugh. Are you alone? He asked. Myra told the truth, finally, perfectly, without even thinking about it. No, she said. The word burned. Someone is getting help. He made a little noise of pleasure that made her skin pebble beneath her coat. Good, he said. That's very good. She pinned her hat lower and waited. The valley breathed on her. Her cheeks went numb, and then hurt, and then ached in a way that felt personal. How long? She asked, because that was normal too. The kinds of questions people ask to hold off the thing that might happen next. Oh, he said, the syllable and exhalation that steamed, and then didn't. A long time, long enough to learn what the snow remembers. He shifted slightly, and a slice of green parka pulled taut against his shoulder, revealing a line of stitching along the side that had been ripped through and hand-mended with a darker thread. It looked like a mouth that had been taught to smile. Myra's eyes drifted to the ground around him. Snow had been scuffed in a halo, not the churn a falling body makes. Marks that started as footprints and ended with something like drag. The prints led away into the trees in a long curve and then back again. There were others, overlapping like whispers. Some came right up to where he lay and then disappeared as if made by feet that didn't believe in leaving evidence forever. The wind shifted, and she heard a sound like claws pulled across old glass. Myra's heart kicked like a deer and bolted toward her throat. He sat up. It wasn't a struggle. It was a decision. His backward legs unfolded without complaint, like a crane's ungainly grace. The arm, she thought, was broken unspooled into something too long, as if the bone had been a rope coiled in secret. Fingers slid out of the snow on the end of that arm, long and pale, with black at their tips. Not nails so much as the idea of nails sharpened to points. He turned his head up toward her and smiled without changing his eyes. Don't be afraid, he sang. We're not alone. Myra's muscles misfired in a dozen directions at once. She shoved backward, crabs grappling with every bit of traction her cleats could find. The lip of the cliff dropped out of her frame of reference, and the world swung. The sound came again, closer. A scrape, like something testing for handholds. She stood and ran, which meant she skittered and slid, and almost went to her knees 2 steps in. The trail pitched as if lifting her to hand her back. Her breath rasped. Somewhere behind her, a laugh chimed like ice. "Peekaboo," he said, from above her somehow. She didn't look. It didn't matter where his voice came from. The valley had a way of throwing sound. And yet her body knew. He had climbed. He had found a concavity, a seam in the stone, and he was hugging himself up with those long arms like a spider that had decided to try mammal. The only prayer left to Myra was forward. She slipped. It was almost a relief. The mind doesn't have to choose when the body chooses for it. Hands grabbed at her shoulders with a tenderness that broke into violence. The moment she felt the points pinch her coat, then skin. He lifted her as if she were a thing he had been promised. "Caught you, Myra," he said, with a fondness that made her stomach buckle. He slung her over a shoulder stiff with cold and moved toward the cliff as if the rules that governed gravity were suggestions for other people. Her vision swung. The cabin they'd passed earlier, a 3-sided linta for day hikers, tilted in her sight like a toy. Someone had just remembered to pack away. She grabbed for it, fingers catching on a splintered beam long enough to draw blood. Then losing it, he stepped to the edge and began to descend, careful as a mother carrying a sleeping child. "Don't," she said, and the word was so small and so late that it made her angry. She reached and found a sapling, a birch as thin as her wrist. When she made herself into weight, the little tree bent and screamed in rings she could feel in her arm. "Let go," he cooed, patient for the first time. "I won't drop you." Something like grief moved behind his voice, a deep empty that looked up from a well. Then the ice above him cracked, one of those big blue sheets that had hung just shy of the ground, gave a sound like a church being torn, and fell. He flinched for the first time. His long limbs came up, instinct, finally. And in that stupid, human reflex, he released her. The slab hit where his head had been a second ago, shattered into blue knives, and slid in a violent slow motion that made time a thick syrup. Myra held the birch until the bark peeled beneath her gloves, and then scrambled up and out with a panic so pure it felt like clarity. She ran and ran. The valley let her keep the sound of her own breath. That was mercy. She didn't look back until the trail turned, and by then it was too late for looking to be a tool. Up ahead, a shape limped into view. Armand. The relief hit her in the knees. Then she saw the angle of his ankle and knew the valley had tried to take his shape and failed. "We have to go," she said, and whatever she carried in her voice made him go without questions. He tried to ask about Hale, about the voice, about the simple math of rescue, and she cut him off with the first lie she had told since her mother died. He wasn't alone, she said. He didn't fall. She didn't say what he was. She didn't have to. Myra pushed him up the last of the steps with a strength she hadn't prayed for, and got him into the Jeep with hands that couldn't stop shaking. The engine turned, the road weighted with its ice, and its room for error that was no room at all. Behind them, something laughed like a creek finding a new path. Armand's ankle was a fruit gone wrong by the time they reached the interstate. It made a throb that Myra could hear, a pulse heavy as a sled over packed snow, and it put a nausea in her throat that tasted like fear and pennies. The hospital lights felt like summer in a city she didn't know, too bright, too clean, too full of the assurance that hurt can be named. And thus, undone, she handed Armand to the nurses and stepped backward in the slow, patient retreat of tide leaving shore. "Did you call anyone?" a woman asked, clipboard poised to capture facts that believed in themselves. Myra shook her head and wanted to say, "I used up my calls in childhood. The city plowed the roads. It couldn't plow the mind." In the waiting room, a television murmured a daytime court show without sound. A captioning bar stuttered across the bottom. Words that looked wrong out of their mouths, soft and severe at once. The waiting room smelled like hand sanitizer and burnt coffee and the sugary iron of newborns hidden behind the hallway doors. Myra studied her palms. The neat crescent of a birch's bark had embedded in her glove, and beneath it, the skin was raw and striped where the tree had tried to keep her. She thought about the birch's rings, counting the years like a secret prayer. She thought about the little blue flowers embroidered on the green parka, the way they looked too tender for the man's voice. She didn't Google anything then. She had learned to let absence be a room she entered slowly. Armand texted her from a bed she wasn't allowed to see yet. A picture of his wrapped ankle, a joke about mummification, a heart in the shape of two parentheses clasping air. Her phone corrected his name, Armand, to arm end. And for a second, she wanted to vomit. She muted the screen and stared at the automatic door to the ambulance bay. Every time it opened, the winter came thin and hungry into the room, sniffed at the corners, then slunk back out. At 3 in the morning, when the world looks like it forgot to save itself, she drove home. The storm had blown itself quiet. The valley in the distance was a black stitch on a felt sky. She slept for an hour and dreamt she had no mouth, only breath, and that something kept catching it in cupped hands and letting it go, catching and letting, patient. When she woke, the sun had the gray, serious look it gets when it doesn't want to overpromise. Armand's texts stacked themselves in her notifications like snow fence slats. X-rays okay, ligaments angry, crutches, home by noon, come over, tell me everything. She told him the version of everything that fit in a human throat. There was a man, she said. He asked for help. He changed. She wasn't sure if she was protecting him or protecting the shape of the story. He listened without interjecting until the part where she said she had told her first truth in years. Then he reached across his blanket and took her wrist, peered at the birch burn, and kissed the far edge of it. "You came back," he said. It wasn't a question. He had that way of choosing the part of reality he wanted to host. She didn't tell him the part about her mother. She didn't tell him the way the valley had said hello, with its whole body. She didn't tell him she had heard the word alone in the voice's hunger, and recognized something like a cousin to her own. Instead, she made him soup and propped his ankle, and pretended the loudest thing in the room was hockey on mute. She stayed until the light turned the color of old yellow paper, and the clock told on her. "You'll come back?" he asked. He meant tomorrow. She heard in one piece. "Yes," she said. "The truth is a boomerang if you hold it right." When she got home, her cottage on the edge of the county woods felt like an apology the land had made and never delivered. The afternoon went on. 2 cups of tea. A shower so hot it turned parts of her pink. The feel of the birch burn waking under the water, like a small truth reasserting itself. She sat down with her laptop and typed Varin Valley accidents winter into a search bar, and got the kind of results people write when they don't want to talk about anything that bleeds. Hiking tips, an article about a new sign, a photo essay of kids in neon hats building snow caves at the picnic area. She tried Varin Valley death hypothermia, Varin Valley fall broken legs, Varin Valley blue flowers. Results skittered away, as if the internet had decided to be kind. Then, a local paper's archive coughed up a 3-day-old piece. A woman had fallen from the upper rim on the same day Myra, and Armand had been there. The photo showed her at a birthday party, a little smear of frosting on her forefinger. A tattoo of a compass rose visible at her wrist. The write-up used the phrase "experienced outdoorswoman" and mentioned her time in the Tetons, as if competence could be stacked like firewood against bad fortune. The coroner had not ruled foul play. Hypothermia. Broken arm, legs. The coat, green, with blue embroidered flowers. The family didn't recognize it. They asked the paper to remove the autopsy details. The story vanished the next day, replaced by a blunt notice. "This article has been updated to respect the family's privacy." Myra stared at the cached version until the screen blurred. She sucked her thumb into her mouth without thinking, found blood in the shape of birch under the pad, and stopped herself with a small, embarrassingly loud sound. The house made a settling noise. The clock spelled out a number that felt too round for comfort. She closed the laptop and put both hands flat on the table like she might push it through the floor. "No," she said, to the room, to the valley, to the world that had turned itself reasonable just when she needed it to be strange. That night, sleep came in little jangly pieces, each one unwrapping in a new voice. At 2, she woke to the sound of someone saying her name in the tone of a nurse who has good news anchored beneath something she doesn't want to say. At 3, to the sound of a baby's halting new cry, the way babies call the air back into their bodies. At 4, to the sound of her mother laughing from the kitchen when they still had a kitchen to laugh in. 5 to the sound that wasn't a sound at all. The hush of a cliff that had learned to listen. When she stepped onto the porch at dawn, frost had feathered the railing in patterns that looked like handwriting. Each mark looked like a mistake, and all of them together looked like intention. She put her palm over them and let the skin go numb. Her phone buzzed. "Armand, come over, please." The please had more letters than usual. The way he made a word carry the weight of a look. She put on boots and drove. The road performed its old trick of becoming new every curve, then remembering itself again. Armand was hollow-eyed and sheepish about it. "I heard it," he said when she handed him coffee. "I heard something, not a voice, my name, in my head, but from outside my head. Do we do therapists for this, or do we do priests?" He tried to smile. The smile did a poor job of hiding the way his mouth wanted to tremble. Myra sat on the edge of his couch and put her hand on his shin, right above the bandage. She was not, it turned out, afraid of being the animal that touches another animal. We do the thing that makes us feel like we're doing something. She wanted to call a ranger, and then wanted not to hear the sound of the ranger's voice when it slid into official civility. She wanted to call the woman's brother, whose grief had been quoted in the article. Wanted to hear him say her name so she knew where to put her mouth on it. She wanted to light a candle, and then, flamboyantly, a bonfire. "We can go back," she said, surprising herself with how her voice didn't break on the words. Armand stared at her as if she had offered him a second ankle. "We are absolutely not going back," he said. "We are absolutely. I can't walk. You can't, Myra. Don't." The word "don't" in his mouth was a little boy throwing his body in front of a door. She didn't have a hero in her. She had only stubbornness and a desire to tell the valley something like the truth, but the valley had asked her name, and now it had it. She could feel the way a thing changes when it is named, how it comes when called. She started, and then stopped. We can do the thing that feels like doing. We can leave something. We can make it choose. Armand said her name like a problem. She got up. She packed a bag, a flare, an old radio whose antenna was kinked and forgiving, a blanket that smelled like cedar, and a house that burned down a decade ago. 2 hand warmers like flat hearts, a thermos of coffee that could outstare the dark. "Don't," he said again, and then, "Take my whistle." He had gotten it for kayaking and had never used it. It dangled from his hand as if he were passing her a tooth. She drove as the light matured from iron to pewter. She parked in the same spot as yesterday, which was to say nowhere, because the lot had no edges yet, only drifts and the memory of paint. The woods were quieter than they had any right to be. Even her keys sounded embarrassed against each other. She stood in front of the trailhead sign and read it again like it might have changed overnight. The orange arrow pointed, as it had pointed, toward the steps. She didn't take them. She went to the rim path that skirted the cliff, the one school children took in spring to peer down and say, "Oh." The wind at the rim moved like something that remembered being an animal. She blew Armand's whistle once, felt how the sound was chewed, and spat back at her boots, and made herself not do it again. She tied the cedar blanket to a trail post where the path took a small bend, and pretended the motion meant she had done something human. She poured coffee into the snow and watched it steam and go dark and then vanish. When she turned to leave, a voice said her name in the gentle tone used by men who believe they have been the answer all along. Myra. It came from below and from the right, and from far away, and close enough to soften frost on the hem of her coat. She did not go to the edge. She did not lie down on her stomach and offer her stomach to the cold. No, she said to the air, to herself. She had never said no to the truth. It came again, not louder, only truer. Myra, are you alone? The last word stretched like a hungry cat, languid and wanting. She thought of her mother's hands, the way they had known the shape of Myra's face, even when they trembled. She thought of the woman in the green coat. The compass rose on her wrist. The way the parka must have felt too small across the back when something wore it that had not been invited to. Not anymore, Myra said, and blew the whistle. The sound hit the valley and broke. The valley said hush, and the hush got up on two legs. The patrol car found Myra's Jeep at the trailhead, with its hood lightly powdered, a mug in the cup holder leaving steam like a thin soul. The deputy was young in the way winter makes young look, like new wood untested, ready to split. He stood at the top of the steps and said a few words like a prayer where anyone could hear him, and then didn't go down. He called it in. He did the thing that looked like doing. Then he drove slow along the ridge road and watched the cold collect under the hemlocks. He told his wife over dinner that he had a feeling he did not care to name. She said, "Change your socks," and he laughed as if that could change a feeling's shape. Myra did not go home. She went to the overlook that most people took pictures of in October. It was not much to look at in February, in the way that people are not much to look at asleep. She sat on a bench that had been sanded smooth by the backs of jeans, and the slow work of hands that needed something to do, while mouths decided what to say. She blew the whistle again and made herself listen for the difference between the valley answering and the valley listening. When the answer came, it wore her mother's voice. "Sweetheart," it said, amused, fond, and wronged by a molecule. The cold went into her teeth then, the deep ache of an old filling. She pressed her tongue to the roof of her mouth, the way she had as a child, to feel the skull close around the soft part. "No," she said, because she wanted to be a person who could pick the truth out of a lineup when it tried to pass with forged paperwork. "What are you?" she asked, and felt like she had opened her throat and put an apple on it. Silence. The snow made a sound when it settled into itself, like a tired person adjusting in a chair. Then, a voice that might have belonged to anyone, and thus did not belong to person. "Are you alone?" The words came out warm, a house smell, Myra thought of all the ways people had asked her that in the last decade disguised as other questions. How's your mom? Seeing anyone? Any family in the area? You're from here, right? You'll be okay, right? It came to her then that alone was a thing that could be made, not just a thing that could be felt. She got up and moved along the rim, slower now. As if not to startle a deer, she held the radio in her left hand, the flare in her right, like a promise she was still bargaining with. She had not used a flare since a canoe trip where a thunderstorm chased them to shore, and lightning hit the river and turned it briefly into a snake made of light. She had kept the flare like a talisman. She imagined it in the valley's mouth, how the red would look on blue ice. Her mind made pictures to keep from making prayers. She heard footsteps, not behind, not below, not anywhere the steps had a right to be. The sound was a careful child on wooden stairs, curious and a little proud of sneaking. Myra, it said, and this time it was Armand's voice, sleepy and teasing and angry at the world on her behalf. Come on, don't make me. It stopped as if embarrassed by what it had almost promised. She blew the whistle, a long, hard note. The sound came back frayed. You can't have my name, she said, not sure if that was how magic worked, or only the way disobedience felt best in the mouth. You already gave it, the voice said, sounding wounded, and for a second she almost apologized. She thought of the woman in the green parka and felt that old heat of anger save itself for the right target. I didn't give you anything, she said. You took. Are you alone? It was petty, throwing its word back to it, but she had learned a lot from petty gods. There was a pause, the length of a person remembering who they were supposed to be, then a different voice, one she had not loved, nor lost, nor invented, answered. No. It sounded delighted, like the first sip of coffee after a long night. No. The snow fell in a way that made it look like the air had decided to moth, the world's edges blurred. Then leave, Myra said. We leave when we are not alone. Her voice had found something like liturgy. What followed might have been a negotiation if the other thing had recognized the value of that kind of speech. The trees leaned in like conspirators. The ice made a sound that was both a refusal and a promise. Come down, it said, softening every word as if dabbing them with a cloth. It's kinder if you come down. Myra pictured the fall, how the body stumbles into prayer as it goes, how the organs tuck, how the ribs petition the rocks with their little white petitions. She lit the flare. The red leapt up like rage that had been waiting for a match. The valley howled, not like a wolf, and not like wind, and not like grief, and like all three. It didn't like the light. It didn't like the color that had nothing to do with the sky. Myra held the flare out into the dark throat below the rim and watched the red stain and then recede. It occurred to her that she did not want to kill anything. It also occurred to her that wanting had very little to do with what happened next. She threw the flare into the mouth of the valley and listened to it strike ice, and then snow, and then some softer thing that gave a sound like a laugh caught between the teeth. Her radio crackled. It had no right to. The batteries were older than the deputy. A voice came thin and sideways, like a letter shoved under the wrong door. Myra. It was a woman's voice, and had in it a Midwest thing that made her skin lift. If you can hear, there are others. The words were frantic and stilted at once, the way fear makes grammar look like a puzzle done in the car. Where? Myra said stupidly, as if this were a game with coordinates and rules. Everywhere, the voice said, and then, whenever it's quiet. The radio went dead like a throat cut. Myra stared at it and felt an anger she recognized from the hospital. Bureaucracy, pretending to be fate. She tossed the radio a foot and then picked it up again and kissed the plastic like a superstitious child. Okay, she said to the radio, to the red light below that pulsed like a wound, to the trees that were definitely listening now. Okay, the snow changed. She felt it rather than saw it, how a storm has an intelligence, how it decides whether it is going to lay a hand or a hand with fingers. It got softer, as if the air had reached saturation and was now content to pet. The world turned into cotton. Footsteps made no sound. Her heartbeat became the loudest thing again, a drum at a parade with no people. The flare hissed and then went out. Darkness walked back in like it had just remembered something on the stove. She backed away from the rim. The path found her boots and made agreement with them. She did not run. Running makes prey. She counted steps, because numbers are the prayer of cowards and the brave. 17 to the bench, 32 to the bend, 8 to the post, where the cedar blanket hung like a surrendered flag. She untied it, stuffed the weight into her bag, and told herself that meant she wasn't leaving anything for the valley to wear. Myra, her mother said from the wrong height. Come home. She went to the car. She did not look back until she had the wheel in her hands and the road in front of her. When she let herself breathe, her breath smelled like cedar and fear, and something else she did not care to name. She drove to Armand's and did the thing that looked like doing. Made dinner he could eat in his lap, counted pills, laughed at a joke about physical therapy being Catholic, both of them smiling too wide at the word penance. When he slept, she did the thing that didn't look like anything. She watched him breathe and imagined a rope between his chest and hers. At 3 in the morning, the radio unplugged antique, propped on her bag like an ornament, crackled again. She woke the way animals wake, all at once, whole. Myra, the voice said, not her mother's, not Armand's, not Hale's careful politeness trying on a name like a suit. A new woman, breathless. Don't come back, it said, and then, too late. The house made a noise she did not recognize, and then recognized. Someone knocking at a door they did not intend to use. The knock came again, very polite. 3 taps. A pause. A single tap that felt like it had been thought about. Myra moved without noise, which is not the same as moving invisibly. The house knew her, which is not the same as liking her. She picked up Armand's kayak whistle and held it hard enough to mark her palm. "Don't," Armand said from the couch, as wide awake as she was, and trying not to breathe like it. "We call someone," he mouthed. She shook her head very small. "There are calls you make that change your name." The door's peephole gave a view like a fishbowl. The night bent itself around the lens and offered her a streetlight, a slush-gray sidewalk, and a person standing directly beneath the light, as if that meant safety. He wore a green parka with blue embroidered flowers. He smiled a little, a smile he had stolen from someone after asking if he could try it on. He lifted a hand to knock again, and his fingers were gloved. Normal. She believed the gloves more than the smile. "Who is it?" she called, and didn't care if the politeness cost. Sorry," he said, soft, Midwestern, a little cracked. "My car. I hit the curb. I think I twisted a pause. Can I use your phone?" He tilted his head. The streetlight laid its pale hand along his cheekbone. He looked like a man who had not slept. He looked like a man who had run from something and was very proud of himself for getting away. She turned the deadbolt and then turned it back, as if the ritual mattered. She disliked the way her body had to make a choice. "Armand," she called, just loud enough. He understood in the way of people who have learned to be each other's intuition. He made himself groan and clatter, the sound of a person on crutches trying to be useful. Hale, or the man in Hale, tilted his head toward the sound and listened. The listening was too careful, like a person watching a clock run out. "We can call for you," she said. She lifted her phone and took a picture through the peephole, because she was now a person who did things that had receipts. The camera protested with a little chirp. The man's head snapped, and for a second, his smile fell off his face. What moved beneath was not an expression. It was a kind of appetite narrowing to a point. Then the smile came back up like a sheet shaken and reset. "I can come to the porch," he said. "If it's easier." "Stay there," Myra said, and heard herself in the voice she had used to tell her mother to take the pills, to breathe, to let go. Hale, no. Not Hale, the man in the parka, with a body he didn't fit, obeyed. Very good, very patient. "Are you alone?" she asked through the wood. He laughed once, a small burst that sounded like Joy's bones showing through. "Never," he said. Behind him, the winter swelled as if it were something that could be pregnant. Something slid past the edge of the peephole's vision. Too tall to be a man, too careful to be a deer. The night exhaled, and she smelled clove and iron. "Not a phone," she said to Armand, who was now next to her in stocking feet, as if silence could be worn like clothing. "The flare." He held up the flare like the end of a liturgy. "You can't," he said. "I'll set us on fire," she said, and felt something like relief at the fact that that would be a normal outcome. She cracked the door and threw the flare into the night like a voice raised in church. It went up with that theatrical hiss, that red that made blood seem the invention of a lesser god. The man flinched like a photograph of a flinch. The gloves burned pleasantly. The flare hit the porch and rolled and smudged its own color across the snow. The thing that had been standing just beyond the streetlight did not step backward so much as blink and reappear 3 inches to the left. It did not like the color. Some truths are color-coded. Myra, it said, and this time there were at least 3 mouths saying it. One of them hers, from a voicemail she had left herself in the hospital a lifetime ago, because her voice had sounded like proof. One of them her mother's, amused and impatient. One of them something new. Armand made a sound like a prayer deciding not to be brave. You want to be invited in, Myra said. You want us to do the work for you. She remembered the story about the man who offered warmth. She remembered the way her mother had died after telling her the truth, and how that had felt like cause and effect, because grief loves the clean line of blame. The man's smile slipped again. Behind him, the shape that had been standing beyond the light leaned forward. It did not have to show itself to be believed. The flare's light made a filigree of darkness around it. Are you alone? It asked, polite, and Myra almost laughed. No, she said, and neither are you. She picked up the radio and pressed the button, and didn't stop pressing. The antenna bent under her thumb with a little cartoon dignity. Everyone who was ever here, she said into it, absurd and precise. Everyone who heard it. If you can hear me, answer. At first, nothing. Then, voices the way fire finds dry things. Here, a man said, and his voice had the silt of Kentucky in it. Here, a girl said, and she could hear the braces on her teeth. Here, a grandmother said, and the radio speaker worried her consonants into lace. The sound filled the room, and then poured itself under the gap at the door, and out into the night. The thing that had asked her to be alone made a sound like a gust hitting a door in an old house. Not pain, surprise. It stepped into the flare's red. It wore the parka wrong now, one sleeve stretched by a limb that had remembered its real length. It bent a leg in a way that made her knee ache. It tilted its head, as if listening not to the voices, but to the attention. It had thought the trick went one way. It had not accounted for the way the lonely can find each other without permission. You will be alone again, it said, and this time the anger came through. It had dipped into human and found the salt. We all are, Myra said, and didn't mean it as despair. She felt the rope between her chest and Armand's chest go taut, and then settle. She felt the rope between her and her mother hum like a string in a piano when someone had slapped the lid, but not tonight. She felt the radio heat in her hand, not with electricity, but with the attention of the voices. She thought of the birch, its little body bending, and then being enough. You can't have my name, she said again. You can't have anyone's. We are loaned to each other. That's the arrangement. The thing went very still, and then did a small, almost human thing. It chose. It turned its head toward the voice that had called here last, the grandmother, and moved the way it had moved in the valley, a slide that wasn't walking. Myra stepped onto the porch, met it halfway, and blew the whistle so hard she felt capillaries burst in her face. The sound went up and then down, and the world listened. The flare guttered. Armand cried out in a wordless "oh." The shape leaned, and for one instant, she saw the face it preferred. Not monstrous, not even hungry. Lonely, ancient, wearing borrowed clothes, trying on borrowed voices, tugging the coat her mother used to wrap around her shoulders, and finding it small across the back. "What do you want?" she asked, because she couldn't help herself. The truth is a bruise you keep pressing. It looked toward the radio, toward the voices it had wanted to make into one, and said, with a tenderness that made her knees hurt, "Company." The word was so simple she wanted to set the house on fire with the simplicity. She could not fix a hunger that at its heart was ordinary. She could starve the trick it liked to use. She stepped back into the house, shut the door, and put her back to it like a child. She turned every lock. She set the chain. She thought of how chain is a word for restraint and also for connection. She handed Armand the flare's dead stick like a baton passed at the end of a race. He laughed once, shocked and wet, and then sobbed into the palm of his hand. She sat down on the floor, her back to the wood, and held the radio to her chest. "Here," she said into it, "not a roll call now, a location." "Here." The voices said it back, some loud, some shy. She felt the house fill up with it, the way a church fills with breath before the song. The knocking didn't come again. The winter perched on the roof and considered its options. The night's angles relaxed a little, as if joints had warmed. A string of siren had started somewhere and forgot to continue. When Myra closed her eyes, she saw the green parka and the blue flowers and her mother at the sink washing a mug. And the way the valley's edge looked when seen from her stomach in the snow. The radio at her chest spoke one last time in the new woman's voice, the one who had said, "Don't come back." "Thank you," it said, and then turned itself quiet like a light. In the morning, they went to the police station with their ridiculous proof. A burned porch, a photo of a parka through a fish eye, a radio that behaved, a half-melted flare, a whistle that had a half-moon pressed into it from a palm. The lieutenant on duty was a woman whose hair had early gray in it, and whose mouth looked like a line someone had drawn to hide how much it felt. She took notes on a page that did not know where to put them. She said, "We'll put more signs up," she said. "Stick to summer," she said, in a voice she kept under the counter. "Don't go alone." They drove to the valley in daylight. The world performed innocence. Children in red coats threw snow against a wall and watched it stick like notes on a refrigerator. A man took a photo of his girlfriend pretending to fall, her arms flung out with dramatic joy. The steps down were salted. The ice falls glowed like saints. Myra stood at the rim and felt the valley do its old trick with sound, and made herself feel something else instead. "You can have your winter," she said softly. "You can have your quiet. You can't have my name. Armand stood beside her, not touching, and more responsible for her balance than any rail. Alone is a verb, he said, out of nowhere, like a reporter learning how to ask the right questions. We won't do it, she smiled. It felt like her mouth had wanted the shape for a long time, and finally got permission. She took out her phone and turned on the recording app and said, "If you are out here and you hear something that knows your name, say it anyway, into this, into anything that turns a voice into a rope. We will tie it to you." She wasn't sure who she was talking to. She wanted it to be everyone. A wind moved through the trees. It managed, very carefully, not to say her name. It managed, very carefully, not to say her name.